Good morning.
Good morning.
Hello.
Hello, hello. Good morning. Well, if you are joining us just now, thank you for joining us. If you're here live, it's amazing. Thanks for joining us live. It is time for a thriving Thursday over here at Getting to Unstuck. Today, we're going to be talking with Sarah Riley, and we're going to be calling her Riley, just so you know. But we're going to be talking about something that we began the beginning of the year with. So, as we're recording this, it's towards the end of January. And if you've been following us, you know that we've been talking about well-being this month and personal and team well-being. It's in relation to the wheel of life is how we've been looking at it. But we also brought up a word and a concept that we have been kind of weaving in through all of our conversations this month. And it's the concept and the idea of growth, degrowth, or true growth or holistic growth. So today we're going to be talking with Riley about, is it possible to think about growth in a way that is in line with the better world? Riley is the co-founder and the chief strategy officer at R&G Strategic. They are a women-founded and led agency that seamlessly blends a creative communications and their sustainability consultancy into one unique offering. So we're going to be exploring what it looks like for organizations and individuals to truly prosper in a way that isn't at the expense of our shared future. So Riley, we are so glad to have you today. Welcome to Getting to Unstuck.
Thank you for inviting me. It's so great to see all of you. I'm really excited to talk about this. I'm really excited about this topic.
You know, Riley, as we were talking before we all got together on screen, one of the pieces that we're looking at is that tension that it does exist for us as individuals, because we have been taught over years and years that the success looks a certain way, that there's a flavor that is the wealth that we want and abundance that we're looking for, and also the tension that occurs naturally for us as we look out in the world and see we want to leave a world that is better than we began, that we want to live a life that is in alignment with those values. Yeah. So we're looking at this today both from that organizational perspective, but also that tension that exists in us individually.
Yeah, and I think you raise a really good point about the way that individuation in business has happened. It's really become an isolationary kind of focus where we're really talking about this cult of personality and these people who are really focused on singular achievement, right? I founded the business, became this wonderful entrepreneur, have all these accolades, then give some of my money back in a philanthropic way. And that's the way that we measure the success. We talk about legacy. But I think the shift that's happening right now, at least in my sector, we're really focused on sustainability, is this idea of a mindset away from individuation and toward sort of community or shared legacy. And that means shared value. What is shared value, and how does shared value apply when you talk about things like social issues or environmental issues? And how do you sort of square that original circle of the individual, leader of a business and move it into this concept of how do we show success when we're thinking or being mindful of the collective and all of these intersecting realities of different people? And I think that that's a really important one because, we've got so many challenging issues to address today. Yeah. And if we aren't thinking about each other, how can we, and if we aren't going together, we're not going to solve it.
Yeah.
And it's manifested in so many ways, right, Riley? I mean, it's manifested, we see it on a day-to-day basis from a coaching perspective, but you can look at the data around loneliness, you can look at the data around mental health. You can see that at least in the West, the United States, Canada, and the UK, there is this cult of individualization, right? And it feels as though that, and that's why we created Whole Human, to kind of go, wait, let's put this all back together because we are one population on this little rock that's spinning through the galaxy. Anyway, I'll stop being esoteric there, but I think it's manifesting across all sorts of industries and all sorts of places. Yeah. So we feel it's really important.
It's you can see it symptomatic in almost every single aspect of life. Yeah, this idea of individuation or turning people into simply just a cog of how well they do or how well they perform, well they're able to contribute, and you make them a solo human, you do a lot of things to that person. You isolate them from other people. You create sort of like, like you said, mental health issues. You also, have this sort of disparity happening where the folks who are, individualized at sort of like the top of the chain, continue to kind of move in that direction and float away from everyone else. So there's a lot of connection happening. And, I think you're describing sort of something as linked to the human condition, but they're also like bringing it down to earth, very practical ways to think about this if you are running a business or you're a business leader, certainly.
So let's talk about some of those things, because first, can we just define, I would love to have your help defining for our audience what we're actually talking about when we talk about, because we've used a few words here that people may have ideas in their mind about. We've used degrowth, we've talked about sustainability. These are all words that we can hear so often that they actually almost diminish or become very mushy in their value. Can we actually define what that means when we talk about, like, we want to create a sustainable workplace and we want to live sustainably?
Yeah, I think what you're saying is, the word degrowth has become almost like meaningless in some ways. It's thrown around, and it is a really broad term. I mean, it does have a few different meanings. I think when you hear, especially people talk about it in terms of, the clean transition and climate and sustainability for business from an environmental and social standpoint, they are specifically referring to the idea of the economy and this sort of hard line or hard sort of approach to the economy as looking at the GDP only. And this idea that somehow that we can achieve as an economy endless growth, right? And there's just probably no way to achieve endless growth with finite resources. Where are we going to go to mine next, right? How much can you dig up? How much can you produce, right? Like, you can't produce, there's only so much you can produce. If you follow the logical conclusion, this is not the greatest way to measure the health of a social system, right? Is this idea of endless GDP growth. So when you hear degrowth, this is a lot of times what folks are talking about. And they're talking about it as sort of a macro or like a systems level. There are lots of conversations happening about alternative systems, especially for you may have heard terms like the circular economy. That's really easy to explain. It sounds more complex than it is. Really, we live in a linear economy. We take, we make, and we waste. So in a circular economy, the idea is we don't waste, we just reuse. So I'm a big vintage shopper. Vintage shops are like the original circular economy model.
Yes, totally.
So we're also closing and reselling them. We're not going to toss them in a landfill. So this is the idea of reusing and reusing until there's barely anything left to discard, right? The idea that a system that would constantly have things in flow. And that model actually reflects the Earth's systems, which co-regulate, right? Because ecosystems co-regulate. They just constantly reuse materials. Like there's nothing wasted in an ecosystem. So there's that idea. I was telling Colin about my other favorite, which is called The Donut Economy. If you haven't read the Donut Economy book by Kate Raworth, she's an excellent economist, big fan of hers. And her idea is, let's try to sit the economy within planetary boundaries that support us. And let's sit it on top of a social safety net that we need for everyone to be safe. So we sit this within these sort of economic, environmental and social indicators that allow us to support the planet and support people on the planet. So I love that. It sort of looks like a donut because there's a sweet spot.
Exactly. Totally.
Outside, you're not in the middle, you're in the donut. So I really love that idea. So when you talk about degrowth at a macro level, those are the concepts that people are throwing around. But I think the practical way to think about degrowth is to try and apply this notion of interconnected ecosystems to your own mindset as a leader and apply sort of practical solutions to that, at the business level or at your organizational level. And what that looks like, in my mind, is trying to evaluate performance on intangible topics that are things like well-being not just of you, but well-being of your team.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, and your value chain. Who are your stakeholders in your value chain? Who's supplying you with materials? Are you being responsible with who is bringing those materials into your organization, or who's being your supplier? Or, you know, who? All of these questions are larger than just the individual, and so you start to look for ways that you can measure success that don't just involve the balance sheet, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And Riley, how did you come upon this? What's your story?
Well, you know, I actually started in traditional advertising quite a while ago, and by way of Toronto, and worked with, you know, the multinationals, and
Yeah.
produced some major campaigns, you know, for some very large brands, and had several years in that industry. And don't get me wrong, I loved it. Had a lot of fun in my younger years, but you know, that work felt, you know, a little bit. I don't want to, you know, slight anyone who's in the industry, but it felt a little meaningless to me. Feel connected to me to something that was beneficial to anyone. You know, I couldn't really see the benefit in another, you know, new Mercedes. They're beautiful cars, but you know, there wasn't sort of like a broader benefit to that felt meaningful to me. And when I, you know, had a sick family member, I decided to move back out to the East Coast, which is a lot smaller in terms of the advertising ecosystem. And I took a role as the head strategist for an account that was focused on an environmental mandate. So Efficiency, a really wonderful lighthouse brand for integrating environmental programming into the energy sector. And I worked with them for 3 years. And then I met my co-founder, and we had said, hey, we're going to quit the service business. We're actually not going to do this anymore. But then we were like, what would keep us in the service business? This was back in 2016. And I looked at that, you know, work that I've been doing and said, this is the best work that I've done. It feels like I'm doing something meaningful. I'm making a difference somehow. And so we founded R&G on the question of how do we tackle the biggest challenges of our time by using the skills that we have? How do we apply the skill sets that we have to tackle this challenge? We learned a lot. And we found out the hard way that in order to do this correctly, you do have to think about internal transformation, internally transforming both yourself, your mindset, and your organization. How do you change so that you can actually walk the talk? I think we talked before about how a lot of folks can see brands making big promises or sweeping commitments about the environment, and will often just say, like, that's just virtue signaling, or they've been doing it. And that is the risk you run if you don't take sort of the opportunity to look internal and make commitments that are about more than just the balance sheet growth, that are about growth in other areas. So that transformation is something we help our clients with now, so that they can communicate effectively, so that they have something to communicate.
To me, that's kind of the there's the nugget there, that idea of sort of virtue signaling and greenwashing. I know for me, just personally, it's so demotivating, right? When you see the slogan, right, and you see it around other things like Pride, and you see this big corporation, you know, doing the slogan, whatever it is, and you just feel like, that's they're not committed. So what would you say to somebody like me, or maybe us, that is living in that tension of or that frustration? Like, what can I do? I mean, to as a leader, to I don't know, to feel like I'm contributing, or to feel like I'm making an impact, or fighting, you know, it's like David versus Goliath sometimes, I think, right?
I don't want to sound trite about it, but the first thing to do is to not try to do it alone. You just can't do this alone. You can't sit at the top of your organization in a bubble and stay individuated. You have to actually talk to people.
Right.
You know, especially people who are down in your front lines of your organization. Oftentimes they're going to have really great ideas for you on ways that they've noticed that things could be improved. And the funny thing is that once you start to tackle certain particular issues that your business can have an impact on, or that have an impact on your business, you're going to notice the other shoe drop. Suddenly, if you're listening to your frontline employees about environmental opportunities that they've spotted, those employees feel more valued, and they suddenly feel more.
Right.
And now you've increased a social quadrant of your indicator that you're looking for in terms of growth. Not just, taken action on environmental, but you've also taken action in some ways on the well-being of your front lines, who want to be heard and who want to be seen as actors and shared stakeholders of that we're trying to grow. So the first thing is, don't try to do it alone. Don't come up with this alone,
Right. Right.
Yeah, I think that's so important because we, it's only been in the last, couple hundred years, or not even, that we have become so individualized in our concepts around how we live, and we just assume that whatever we're being served is the way that needs to be done. So from everything from how we build our cities and our lives to everything. And so one of the things that I think we see in our conversations with our clients and in the worlds that we're operating in is this idea of feeling disconnected from either from the mission of the organization. Maybe it feels like it doesn't have one. How can I lead from within this place that I'm in? If I feel powerless, then it only makes sense that my actions are going to reflect that powerlessness. So when we talk about that internal shift and transformation, to be able to become more, such an overused word, but like holistic, whatever we want to, however we want to position that. What are some things that you see or that you know to be true from your perspective that will help people begin to take agency where they are right now, to embrace this perspective? Not just this perspective, but to actually transform into this, or take steps further to becoming what they know they're capable of becoming.
Maybe it's a more complex answer, but I think there's a spectrum of things. So on the one hand, there's the personal and sort of like what values are driving you, or what values are driving sort of your work. And those things will often help sort of shift your mindset, especially when you start looking for opportunities and you start looking for ways to sort of flex that ecosystem that's available to you, and kind of tackling the issues, especially that mean something or that are very aligned to your personal values. Knowing, that it's okay to make progress and not solve is another thing to think about on the personal side of things. That progress is good. Progress is excellent. If everyone was making progress, think about how much further we'd be, versus sort of trying to solve it. I mean, the first thing that will prevent you from moving forward is just saying, well, we can't solve it, so why should we? But in terms of, and this will come to my next point on the other end of the spectrum, which is existential business realities. In terms of climate, if everyone made a little progress, it would actually be reflective of a lot of progress.
So true.
Because we are talking about a shared problem where we've got emissions going up into the atmosphere and they are collecting up there. And so if everyone made a little progress on this, there would be fewer emissions overall. And that would actually represent quite a large percentage if everyone made, a step this year and a step next year. So on the personal side, I would say a little progress is reflective of a shared progress that is worth having, right? And then on that other end of the spectrum of how do we shift or how do we do this, is that existential business question of if you are still tied to this idea of individuation, or still tied to, this kind of how are we demonstrating success on a way that other people expect to see it, or the old school model of founder leads the way. That's not a bad thing. I think I think it's excellent. I think it's just, there's a more holistic way to think about it. Then the outside force, I think, is that some of these issues are now an existential issue for your business. So a really great example is I heard, anecdotally, a company that had visited its investors in the UK. And they were in the boardroom, and they started a presentation on climate to share what they've been doing on climate. and their investor said, I'm going to stop you right there. Like, this issue is table stakes. We just expect you to perform on this issue. This is the status quo now. We want to see what you're doing next. Where are you on the next issue? Where are you on biodiversity? Where are you on, these up and coming questions? Because if you can't sort climate, we're going to pull our funds. So these guys are going to hear more and more frequently. So if you're not motivated to do it, from the perspective of, shared progress and, shifting a mindset or values, personal values, then be motivated to do it, because some of these issues are certainly business issues that are existential.
Yeah.
And what I appreciate, Riley, is that it gives us as humans, as individual humans, a sense of our own opportunity to work together to create something, to be building towards something. Because a lot of what we hear sometimes is people feel really discouraged. They feel really depressed and desperate that they will not be able to make a difference. And so I'm really hearing that opportunity, and the word that you used was community.
Yes.
Yes. Wow.
We're a B Corp. And one of the ways that I've replaced this sort of endless kind of, chasing of the balance sheet reflection of success is how well we do on our B Corp assessment, and how, invested we are in that process. And I have personally firsthand seen how, incredibly rewarding it is to have this high score in a certain area, but also see that reflected in the way that the team cohesion works, and how well our culture resonates with the team, and how people feel supported. And I actually find that to be incredibly rewarding as a leader, that people feel like they really want to work at our company is an incredibly rewarding feeling to me. And, whether we are only at 20% growth or we're at like 35% growth, it makes no difference to me, at the end of the day, because I actually have this other rewarding thing where I can look at this, B Corp and this B Corp active, action, and know that we're doing a great job there, and people feel good. So yeah, I guess, seeing value there. And I think that the secret is finding the issues that matter. For me, it's people. I want people that work with me and work for me to feel, supported and have well-being and have balance in their lives. For other people, it may be the environment, or it may be their community. It may be their literal, becoming more involved civically, or, more involved philanthropically. But you can measure all of these things in a way that is, more holistic and added to success, for sure.
You
Not just
mentioned
the
earlier,
old paradigm stuff. Yeah.
well, true. You mentioned that we may not all become B Corp, but there is an assessment that is available that doesn't cost anything. Is that right?
Yeah, we talked earlier about like, how would you get started? I think, especially if you are just curious, what would it look like to tackle some of these environmental or social questions? The B Corp impact assessment is a really great place to start, because it's free. You can go ahead and start to answer the questions about the company and really get a sense of how well you're doing. But more importantly, really get a sense of what they care about, or what they're placing value on, or what they're saying should be the shared metric that you're looking for. How much weighting they give to particular issues across 5 impact areas. So, you get a real sense for what they're saying. Hey, these are the areas that you should be thinking about. So even if you didn't go through the entire process of filling out the entire assessment, it's still worth just taking a look and just kind of doing your own self-evaluation and saying, am I really thinking about my workers this way? Am I really thinking about the environment this way? Have I done this type of thing in the organization? Taking it up a notch would be thinking about the things that your organization can make an impact around. So those issues are things that you uniquely can take action on. If you're a manufacturing company, waste is going to be a big one, for instance. So what are these things that you uniquely can kind of focus in on and really make a difference on and make some progress on? And then the next level up is what things have an impact on you, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what are you doing, not just because your business can do something, but because if you don't do something, your business might actually struggle in the future. How can you lead on these issues?
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. Riley, this has been such a great conversation. I really appreciate how you were able to help us see the perspective of both the macro and the micro. So if you have, I would just like to ask you one last question as we're getting ready to sign off, looking at the time. If you had one thing that you would want to say, if you're sitting across the table from someone right now, you're in a coffee shop, and they said, they're like, what's one word of wisdom that you have for me for going forward from what we've talked about today, what would it be? I totally sprung this on you.
I have to put it into one word.
I can say that again.
Do I have to reduce it? You said one word, and I'm like, oh, if I could only fit it into one word.
Not one word, but one
sentence.
thought. Yeah, one thought, one sentence.
I think that this can be daunting. I think that the idea of sustainability, the idea of climate, these are daunting issues because they're shared issues, because we all live under the same, sky. So we're all sharing the effects, and the outcomes of this. So these are, from a high level view, these can be really big issues. I feel like you cannot make a big enough contribution. Drop in the bucket and nothing that you can do, is really going to affect them. So I think my first piece of advice would be to say, make it personal, like make it as personal as you can, and make that focus on that issue as small as you need it to be in order to do something, right? That gives you that sense of, whether for me, like personal reward, or whether you see that other shoe drop and you get that impact on your balance because you did something. Make it as small as it needs to be. Make that action as small as it needs to be manageable, and make it personal. And then that way you're almost guaranteed, right, to go through with these things, or to bring these things into the heart of your personal journey and your business's operations, if you do that and really kind of take those bite-sized pieces. And that's really what I would say to someone, is just get started and do, even if it's this big, and just make it personal.
It totally aligns with what we've been speaking about the last few weeks as well, because there's so much going on in the world that you can feel kind of helpless, right? Like not only around sustainability and climate and everything like that, but just around geopolitics even. And we've been saying and suggesting to people, just start right outside your front door or inside your door, like just start really close to home, because that has an impact. And so I love how you've aligned with what we've been saying the last few weeks. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Riley. And if you are still here and you're listening, thanks for sharing this space with us today. Thanks for your support. And if you have enjoyed this show or any of the other ones you've listened to, why not like and subscribe? And anywhere you see it, leave us a review. We also love comments and questions, because we take those and we integrate them into what we're talking about going forward. Again, Riley, thank you for joining us. It is a pleasure. And we just wish you all the best. And we are excited to see all the great things you're going to do in the days ahead. Thanks.
Thank you for inviting me. I loved speaking to all of you.
Thank you. All right. Thanks for joining. See you next week.